Good morning, everyone. My name is Hussein. I'm a session chair as well as a presenter here. I'm excited to present my literature review on the impact of eye tracking on the detection of phishing cyber attacks. As we know, phishing is the most common type of cyber attacks today, and it poses a significant threat to the security of sensitive information. So in this presentation, I'll discuss how eye tracking measures can help improve our understanding as well as detection of phishing cyber attacks. I'll be introducing phishing and eye tracking first. I'll then go through eye tracking devices, measurement methods, and then I'll explain areas of interest for the specific research and what it actually means. I'll go through the findings, the implications, the limitations, and I'll finally conclude. So we've heard the term phishing before. We've gotten emails or messages that warn us from falling victim to phishing attacks. Sorry, but what is phishing? So phishing is an attempt to acquire sensitive information from a potential victim through email, telephone, or text message by disguising as a credible entity or institution. And as of 2021, it has been reported that around 90% of data breaches occur on account of phishing, whereas about 83% of organizations experienced phishing attacks. And this is a 2021 State of Phishing report from Proofpoint, which goes to show how great of an issue phishing is. We can see that in 2020, 75% of businesses experienced some form of phishing. 30% of organizations agreed to pay ransom. And interestingly enough, 38% of people who don't undergo cyber awareness training fail simulated phishing tests. These statistics emphasize on the need of effective prevention strategies. Moving on, we can see some of the main impersonated companies by attackers, such as Microsoft, DHL, LinkedIn, Amazon, and so on, as well as the total number of Google registered phishing websites as of 2021, which exceeds 2 million. Some problems which help make these attacks successful actually are poor usability, and the fact that most users consider security a secondary task. Also, some security indicators are only visible when the content is secure, which makes the absence of security indicators even less likely to be acknowledged. Therefore, it's important to understand how users interact with these security measures in order to help improve their effectiveness. Let's move to eye tracking. So eye tracking measures the point of gaze and eye motion relative to the head, producing a gaze path video and large quantities of physiological data related to attention as well as emotion. And so to investigate the impact of factors extracted from eye tracking on the susceptibility to phishing attacks, I collected and analyzed all 20 empirical studies, which I found that are related to the topic. So you might ask, why was eye tracking specifically used to study people's behavior? And here I will highlight some benefits of eye tracking. So eye tracking provides insights into memory, mental computations, reading, problem solving, as well as learning strategies. Specifically, gaze position assesses the thought process in a moment-by-moment manner, and gaze fixations are used to calculate the time spent looking at a particular location or particular area of interest, as we will be calling it in a bit, which reflects engagement of attention and the time required to process that stimulus. Also, it provides a more natural experimental environment, facilitates forming larger and more diverse sample sizes, and has a quicker calibration process. But nonetheless, modern eye trackers are actually becoming smaller and more portable devices, which makes it even more convenient to do this type of experiments. And now, eye tracking devices used in these experiments are classified into mobile as well as stationary devices. The main difference between these two is that the stationary eye trackers can only be used in the laboratory. As you can see in the table, there's a brief comparison of eye trackers used in terms of frequency and accuracy. And yeah, we can see from the table, that stationary and mobile eye trackers are almost equally as popular for this type of experiment. But a lot of, or most eye trackers were from Tobii, or like the Tobii company. Secondly, we can see that eye movements were mostly recorded at 60 hertz, whereas the majority of eye trackers used had an accuracy of 0.5 degrees. So for the measurement methods, in this experiment, or in these experiments, the independent variable consisted of the phishing stimuli, or the phishing content that is presented to users randomly. Users were required to determine whether the presented content is legitimate, illegitimate, or sometimes whether they were unsure if there was an option to do so. The dependent variables were measured by eye trackers, which were timestamp, gaze position relative to the phishing stimuli, position in the eye tracker's field of view, pupil size, and validity code of each eye. And from these, different measurement metrics were derived in the studies, and areas of interest or AOIs were used to link them to parts of the used stimulus. So for the reviewed work, this table here presents all studied metrics in relation to AOIs. This includes metrics like time to first fixation, which describes the time taken to look at the first AOI. Also, the number of regressions, which indicates that a certain AOI drew attention and needed further processing, in addition to metrics like glance duration, which denotes the depth of processing, and so on. So for areas of interest or AOIs are used to link measured parameters to parts of the used stimulus. And here I'd like to mention that personal attributes such as age and gender were considered secondary metrics in most of these experiments. So they weren't really studied or paid attention to much in these studies. However, authors highlighted that they contributed to unexpected, complex, and inconsistent results in some cases in relation to susceptibility. We can see the AOIs for phishing emails in the table on the left, and for URLs in the table on the right. These two were mainly the phishing content or phishing stimuli used for participants in the experiment. For emails, AOIs for participants were the email address, subject line, addressee, and instruction line. The email address of the sender, for instance, is more likely to get people engaged, especially if the sender is familiar to them. And here we need to note also that the entire domain could be spoofed, which means that it's not an entirely standalone AOI to look for when detecting phishing emails. So one must look for more than or one must look at more than one AOI to determine whether the content is legitimate or not. On the other hand, we have the subject line, which uses urgency, personalization, personalization and/or pressure to deceive the user. And for the addressee and the instruction line, one can gather information about the addressee and use that to personalize the phishing content, or simply use general information while disguising as an entity in which the user is required to comply to. So there's more than one way to do it for the attacker. On the other hand, there is one distinctive AOI about URLs, which is visuals. So users can look for visual security targets, such as the trusted digital certificate indicator for the web page, which is the lock icon with the green background on the URL bar. There is also SSL TLS, the encryption indicator. And moving on. So with all this information gathered from the users, let's take a look at the results. I classified my analysis of the results into technical attributes, personal attributes, as well as urgency and threat attributes. So starting with technical attributes, we can define technical attributes as the form and content-related aspects of crafted phishing attacks. And these majorly impacted user behavior, as it was found that users paid most attention to salient design elements, spelling errors, URLs, sender's address, personalized content, interface, and visual URL security indicators. As a result, their decisions were highly impacted by their perceived legitimacy of these attributes. However, there was a general absence of a statistically significant correlation between detection accuracy and gaze fixation on the entire phishing materials. And this makes it unclear whether the materials are successfully achieving their purpose. Going more into detail, I found that emails containing misspelling were rated as less trustworthy than the others. So that can be justified as misspelling was found to be we can say that misspelling is a more categorical factor than urgency or threat indicators, which are open to personal interpretation. And for URLs, it was found that users can only expend a finite budget of resources to classify legitimacy. So if the required resources exceed the budget, users will not expend them. And although threshold depends on factors other than the URL length, this notion is expected to apply generally. Also, fixation and dwell times are the highest for email addresses, as well as website address bars, which can make us say that addresses are perceived as helpful phishing indicators, at least for the users. However, we also need to highlight that a single AOI does not necessarily translate into sound phishing determinations. And this was proven by the fact that users who studied multiple AOIs had better detection accuracy. Also, specific content, namely that asking for credit card information, was most likely to be identified as illegitimate. This may be justified by saying that most users have heard about phishing through a typical message, alerting users of messages, emails, or whatever asking for credit card information. Lastly, contextual relevance and misplaced salience negatively impact security awareness. For example, when users are faced with messages aligned with their work context. They pay less attention to security cues compared to when they are misaligned. And actually reading this, I thought it was counterintuitive for me, but I realized then that whenever I get an email with a weird subject line or sender, I'm like, is this a scam? Let me check, let me investigate. But nonetheless, for salient design elements, they draw attention away from cues more than plain text. And this result was emphasized by more than one study. Moving on to personal attributes. So when it comes to personal attributes, those with a technical background, domain knowledge, experience, attention control, and risk perception showed higher attentiveness levels, resulting in a higher detection accuracy. For example, those experienced in web architecture and are capable of precisely interpreting URLs, locks, and page redirection have demonstrated awareness by attending to a larger number of security-related information cues. On the other hand, non-experts compensated for the lack of domain knowledge and experience by allowing more processing time to each email or website. And here we compare, and comparing the average glance duration for both groups, we highlight the importance of processing time for non-experts. And also, contradictory to assumptions made by more than one author, actually, in more than one research, agreeableness does not translate to less attention to security-related cues, therefore having little to no impact on susceptibility to phishing. This was also highlighted by all the papers which assumed that agreeableness would lead to less detection accuracy. Moving on, it was found that attention control is a personality trait that is highly correlated with detection accuracy. It's characterized by pupil dilation, which provides an index of overall attentional effort, though its time locked to stimulus changes during attention. Most importantly, the authors stress that although domain knowledge, experience, and attention control are key factors for mitigating phishing attacks, they do not entirely guarantee user safety. And instead, user or risk awareness must be linked to a perceived vulnerability or a mitigation strategy. And although personal attributes can be rather difficult to change, adequate training can definitely decrease susceptibility to phishing attacks. And lastly, we'll discuss results in response to urgency as well as threat indicators. So it was found that when facing warnings or threats, the glance duration was the highest. Also, the urgency and threat content's immediate capture of human attention is justified by a lot of papers, by survival information bias, in which humans prioritize processing information, possibly related to their well-being. Users classify this type of information as less trustworthy and were more attentive to cues and security warnings, which activated pattern matching mechanisms and induced a positive behavior towards phishing attacks. On the long term, however, repeated exposure to security warnings may cause warnings to be physically seen, but not truly perceived by users. And for example, glance duration is going to decrease over successive viewings and will decrease faster when viewing static warnings as compared to polymorphic warnings. So given the findings of those studies, let's take a look at the implications. So results demonstrate that eye tracking technology is useful in collecting gaze data for humans on phishing AOIs and provide avenues for improving existing technology and increasing human awareness. So specifically, we'll discuss 4 implications. The results can form a basis for developing user-friendly URLs and visual aids for browsing, such as by changing the color, size, or position of an indicator to make it more visually distinct and therefore an effective security cue. Secondly, the results can help us develop visual aids for browsing, which could be used to guide user attention to critical AOIs and improve phishing detection accuracy. And since the visual aids infer attentiveness states and assess the reliability of user response, this makes improving detection accuracy possible even when users have low attention levels. And thirdly, embedded and automated authentication could be implemented to inform users about the legitimacy of a website. This implication, as well as the last one, are, in my opinion, the most important. But finally, a very crucial part is education and training. It's important to train users to improve knowledge and attentiveness, since these were the main personal attributes to impact detection accuracy. This can be done by using training modules with heavy user involvement, as well as tailoring materials to individuals based on their individual abilities and contextual relevance. So for the limitations of the study include, firstly, the relatively small sample sizes used for the experiments. This is arguably insufficient to investigate individual variability in how well eye tracking estimates the ability to detect phishing attacks. Also, in some of the experiments, some participants were excluded from the studies due to low validity scores, which are caused by measurement devices, as well as participant imprudence, such as sudden head, neck, or face movements. So as a result, these reduced sample sizes may have caused overfitting problems. Secondly, the setting of the experiment is artificial, meaning that participants were explicitly informed that they must spot phishing emails and/or websites. So there is no form of deception there, which may have caused participation bias. The results are therefore expected to demonstrate an upper bound on users' ability to correctly identify phishing. And lastly, the utilization of online sources for the majority of phishing materials was not ideal, since actually a great part of the phishing content was presented in the form of screenshots. This means that users were unable to interact with some of the presented materials as they would in a real-life setting. So in summary, users with a high detection accuracy are characterized by high knowledge and high attention control levels on areas of interest. Other attributes, such as technical background, experience, training, and risk perception, also contribute to mitigating these attacks. Derived gaze position metrics, including time to first fixation, entry time, and entry sequence, yielded inconclusive results regarding the impact on susceptibility to phishing. And the results can assist in creating better online security cues, embedded and automated authentication, creating visual browsing aids, as well as training materials. And lastly, as we've mentioned, these findings are expected to be upper bounds on what users would achieve in practice. Thank you for your time. Please feel free to ask questions.